Siren had not woken that morning, expecting to stand before the Alpha King and tell him his sister was going to die. But here she was, the words already passed her lips. The silence that followed so absolute, she could hear the candle wicks hissing 20 feet away. The great hall of Dunhaven was full. Every seat at the long banquet tables was taken. 50 wolves of rank and title sat, with wine in their hands and shock frozen across their faces. Servants along the far wall had gone still. A carving knife hovered mid-slice over a joint of lamb, the cook holding it as though he had forgotten what his hands were for. And at the head of it all, elevated on a dais that put him above every other living soul in the room, King Tavian Varens stared down at her. He had not moved, had not blinked. His dark eyes locked onto hers with a force that made her legs want to buckle, and the sheer weight of his presence bore down on her chest like a slab of cold stone. He was enormous. She had known that in theory. Everyone in Dunhaven knew the king was built like something war had carved out of granite and then forgotten to soften. But knowing it and standing 6 feet from it were two very different experiences. His shoulders blocked out the banner behind him. His jaw was set so hard the muscle jumped visibly beneath the skin. One hand rested on the arm of his chair, and the fingers, long and scarred across the knuckles, had gone white. "Say that again," the king said. His voice was quiet, not calm. Quiet, the way a blade is quiet, just before it cut. Siren's mouth had gone dry. Every rational thought in her head screamed at her to bow and apologize and retreat before this man destroyed her for the interruption alone. A maid did not approach the king during a formal banquet. A maid did not speak unless spoken to. A maid certainly did not walk the length of the great hall in full view of every noble and counselor in the kingdom and say the words she had just said, but she had seen the blood. She had seen the horses screaming, the carriage tipping sideways into the ravine, the door torn open and the body dragged out into the snow. She had seen Leora Varen, the king's younger sister, 19 years old, with her whole life ahead of her, crumpled on the frozen ground with the life draining from her eyes. The vision had not been gentle about the details. "The carriage carrying your sister will not reach the Ashford crossing, Your Majesty," Siren repeated. And she could feel her voice shaking, but she could not stop it now. "It will be ambushed before it clears the eastern pass." Tavian's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted, a recalculation, a reassessment of the trembling servant girl standing before him, who clearly had no business knowing anything about military routes or royal travel. "The Eastern Pass is a secure route," said a voice to her left. Lord Hadrick, one of the king's senior counselors, leaned forward in his seat with an expression that hovered between irritation and contempt. "Guarded by the king's own garrison, no one would dare." Siren looked at the counselor. Then she looked back at the king. "The wolves waiting in the pass are not wild, Your Majesty," she said. "They are wearing your crest. And whoever gave them the order wants your sister dead before morning." The hall went colder than the winter outside. Lord Hadrick's mouth opened, then shut. The woman beside him set her goblet down so carefully it made no sound at all. Somewhere near the back of the room, a chair scraped against stone as someone stood up without meaning to. King Tavian Varen had gone completely still, not the stillness of a man thinking. The stillness of a predator who has just caught a scent that changes everything. His gaze bore into Serene, with an intensity that made her stomach drop, and her knees threatened to give way entirely. She watched his hand tighten on the arm of his chair until the wood groaned under the pressure. Then he moved. He rose from his seat in a single fluid motion that sent the chair scraping back and every person in the hall flinching. "Fen," he said, and the word cracked across the room like a whip. A man near the dais wall stepped forward immediately, tall, lean, dark-haired, with the coiled alertness of someone who was always half a second from violence. "The king's beta, riders to the Eastern Pass. Now, full-armed escort. Intercept the carriage before it reaches the gorge. Go." Fen was already moving before the king finished. He crossed the hall in long strides, gesturing sharply to two guards by the door. They vanished into the corridor together, boots echoing off stone. The king turned back to Saren. Every pair of eyes in the room followed. "You," he said, and the single word pinned her to the floor. "Stay exactly where you are." He descended the dais steps, and the crowd parted for him like water. He passed close enough that she caught his scent, cedar and iron, and something wild beneath it that made the hair on the back of her neck rise. He did not look at her again as he strode out of the hall, but she felt his attention on her like a hand pressed between her shoulder blades. The doors closed behind him. Saren stood alone in the center of the great hall, surrounded by 50 stunned wolves, and realized she could not feel her hands. A guard materialized beside her. His face was carefully neutral, but his eyes kept flicking toward her like she was a puzzle he had not been given the pieces for. "Come with me," he said. He led her out of the hall, down a corridor she had never walked, and into a small windowless room with a single chair and a door that locked from the outside. "Wait here," the guard said, and closed the door. Saren sat down on the chair, pressed her trembling hands between her knees, and waited for whatever was coming next. She had either just saved the king's sister or signed her own death warrant, and she genuinely could not tell which. She had been having the visions since she was 9 years old. The first one came on a Tuesday, ordinary and unremarkable, until the moment it wasn't. She had been carrying a basket of laundry across the lower courtyard when the world folded in on itself, and she saw the stable master pinned beneath a fallen beam, his face gray, his chest not moving. 3 hours later, the stable roof collapsed. They pulled him out alive, barely. No one asked how a 9-year-old orphan had known to scream a warning before the wood even cracked. The second vision came a month later. Then another, each one sharper, each one harder to dismiss as coincidence. By the time she was 12, Saren understood 3 things about her gift with perfect clarity. First, the visions only showed death. Never joy, never peace, only the moment something ended. Second, they were never wrong. And third, no one wanted to hear about them. She had tried telling people once. The head housekeeper had called her a liar and docked her evening meal. A guard she had warned about a loose railing had laughed in her face and told her to stop being dramatic. When she persisted, Mistress Calloway, the woman who managed the palace's foundling servants, had sat her down and explained in a voice that left no room for argument that girls who spoke of seeing things that hadn't happened yet were burned in some parts of the realm. Saren had stopped talking about the visions. After that, she had not stopped having them. They came without warning, without pattern, without mercy. A flash behind her eyes, a lurch in her stomach, and then she was somewhere else, watching someone die. Sometimes it was a stranger in a market square she would never visit. Sometimes it was a palace servant she passed in the corridor every day. Once, horribly, it was a child in the village below the castle, and she had sat in the scullery with her apron pressed to her mouth and wept silently for an hour because she could not save her without exposing what she was. That was the cruelest part of the gift. She saw death coming, and most of the time she could do nothing about it. This morning had started the same as every other. Saren was on her knees in the East Wing corridor, scrubbing stone tiles with a brush that had seen better decades, when the vision hit her like a fist to the chest. The carriage first. Sleek, black lacquer, the Varan crest in silver on the door, 2 horses in front, breath steaming in the cold mountain air. Inside, a young woman with dark hair braided over one shoulder, and the king's own jawline softened into something lovely. Leora Varan, returning from a diplomatic visit to the northern border clans. Then the pass. A narrow stretch of road carved between sheer rock walls, the kind of place that made even seasoned travelers grip their seat. Snow on the ground, thick and undisturbed except for the tracks that shouldn't have been there. Wolves. A dozen of them, positioned along the ridgeline, on both sides, waiting, patient, organized. Not wild animals hunting by instinct, Soldiers hunting by design. The attack was fast. The lead horse went down with a sound Saren would hear in her nightmares. The carriage lurched, tipped, struck the rock wall and splintered. Leora screamed. The door was wrenched open. Hands reached inside. And then, the part that had driven Saren to her feet, with her heart slamming against her ribs and her scrub brush clattering to the floor. In the vision, the moonlight caught the armor of the nearest wolf as he shifted back to human form. On his shoulder, clear and unmistakable, was the king's own crest. These were not enemies. These were Tavian Varen's own wolves, turned against his blood. Saren had stood in the corridor, shaking, her stomach heaving, and understood that she had a choice. She could do what she had always done. Swallow the vision, bury it. Go back to her tiles, and her brush, and her invisible life, and let someone else's death be someone else's problem. Or she could speak. She tried the proper channels first. Of course she did. She went to the head of household and asked, as calmly as she could manage, whether there was a way to send an urgent message to the king's guard. She was told that maids did not send messages to anyone and to get back to work. She found a guard she recognized and told him she had reason to believe the princess's carriage was in danger. He looked at her blankly and asked what possible reason a floor scrubber could have for believing anything about royal travel. By late afternoon, the vision had returned twice more, each time sharper, each time more insistent, as though the gift itself was furious with her for hesitating. The last time, she felt Leora's terror, as though it were her own, the girl's heartbeat racing against Saren's ribs, the cold air on her skin, the helpless, desperate awareness that no one was coming to save her. That was when Saren made her decision. The banquet was already underway when she entered the great hall through the servants' passage. She had changed into the cleanest dress she owned, which was not saying much. Her hands were still rough from the morning's scrubbing. Her hair was pinned back hastily and already falling loose around her face. She walked the length of the hall. Every step felt like wading through deep water. She could feel the stares accumulating, the whispers building, the collective bewilderment of 50 powerful wolves watching a nobody servant approach the most dangerous man in the kingdom uninvited. The king had looked up. His dark eyes found her across the remaining distance, and the impact of his gaze nearly stopped her in her tracks. The raw power emanating from him was suffocating. His face was unreadable, carved from something harder than the stone walls surrounding them, and every instinct in her body screamed at her to bow and retreat and disappear. She did not disappear. She spoke instead. And in the hours that followed, everything happened exactly as it was always going to. Fenn's riders reached the eastern pass with barely 20 minutes to spare. They found the wolves exactly where Saren had described, positioned along the ridgeline, armed and waiting. The battle was brief and brutal. Leora's carriage was intercepted a mile before the gorge. The princess was shaken, but unharmed. 3 of the ambushers were captured alive. They were wearing the king's crest. By midnight, Saren had been sitting in the windowless room for over 4 hours. Her back ached, her throat was parched. Her mind cycled through every possible outcome, and none of them were good. The lock clicked, the door swung open. Fenn stood in the corridor, his face unreadable, his posture carrying the coiled energy of a man who had just ridden hard and fought harder. There was a smear of dried blood on his sleeve that she chose not to examine too closely. "Follow me," the beta said. "The king will see you now." The king's private study was nothing like Saren had imagined. She had expected grandeur, gold leaf and velvet, and the trappings of power arranged for maximum intimidation. Instead, the room was austere. Stone walls lined with bookshelves, a heavy oak desk buried under maps and correspondence, narrow windows that let in only thin gray light even during the day. At this hour, the only illumination came from the fire in the hearth, and 2 oil lamps burning low on either side of the desk. It was a room that belonged to a man who worked, not one who performed. King Tavian Varen, sat behind the desk. He had removed his formal banquet coat and wore only a dark shirt, with the sleeves pushed to his elbows, revealing forearms roped with muscle and lined with old scars. His hair, black as pitch, was slightly disheveled as though he had been running his hands through it. He looked up when Fen led her inside, and Saren felt the full force of his attention like a physical blow. His eyes were the color of iron in winter, and they held no warmth at all. Fen positioned himself by the door. The wood groaned as it closed behind them. "Sit," the king said. There was a single chair facing the desk. Siren crossed to it on legs she could not entirely feel, and lowered herself down, her hands clasped together in her lap, knuckles white, and she focused on keeping her breathing even. The fire crackled. The king watched her. "My sister is alive," he said. Saren nodded, not trusting her voice. "The ambush was real. The attackers were wearing my crest, exactly as you described. 3 have been taken into custody. They are being questioned as we speak." His tone was clipped, measured, each word placed with precision. "So now I need to understand how a palace maid knew the precise location of a covert military ambush before my own intelligence did." Saren swallowed. She had known this was coming, had tried to prepare for it during those 4 hours in the windowless room. But no amount of rehearsal could make this easier. "I see things, Your Majesty," she said. "Things that haven't happened yet." The silence that followed was heavy. "Be more specific," the king said. "Visions," Saren managed. "They come without warning. I see how people die." She paused, forcing the next words out past the tightness in her throat. "I have had this gift since I was a child. I have never been wrong." Tavian leaned back in his chair. His expression betrayed nothing, but his fingers tapped once against the desk, a single controlled beat. "Asir," Fen said from the doorway, his voice neutral. "Supposedly," the king replied, without looking away from her. "It is not supposedly, Your Majesty," Saren said, and immediately regretted the sharpness in her tone. But she was exhausted and frightened, and the memory of Leora's screams was still echoing in her skull. "Your sister would be dead right now if I had not seen what I saw. I am not asking you to believe in the impossible. I am asking you to believe the evidence in front of you." Something shifted in the king's expression. Not softening, not exactly, but the faintest crack in the stone facade. He studied her for a long moment, and Saren had the unsettling sensation of being examined at a level far deeper than appearance. "Who else knows about this ability?" he asked. "No one, Your Majesty." "I learned very early that people do not respond well to being told how they are going to die." The corner of his mouth moved, not a smile, the ghost of one, there and gone so fast she might have imagined it. "I imagine not," he said. He stood. The movement was sudden enough that Saren flinched in her chair, and she hated herself for it. He crossed to the window and stood with his back to her, staring out at the dark courtyard below. "You took an extraordinary risk tonight," he said. "You could have been arrested, flogged. Worse, your sister could have died. Your Majesty." He turned his head slightly. She could see his profile against the glass, the strong line of his nose, the tension locked into his jaw. "You do not know my sister." "No," Saren said. "But I know what it feels like to watch someone die and do nothing." I was not willing to feel that again. The quiet that followed felt different from the silences before it. Less interrogation, more something she could not name. Tavian turned from the window and walked back toward the desk. That was when it happened. He was mid-stride when his hand shot out and gripped the edge of the desk so hard the wood groaned, his jaw locked. His eyes, for one flickering instant, flashed a deep, burning amber before snapping back to iron gray. A shudder passed through his frame. Not large, not dramatic, but unmistakable. His entire body tensed as though something inside him had lurched and he was fighting to hold it down. Saren sat very still. She did not know what she had just witnessed, but every instinct told her it was something she was not supposed to see. The moment passed. Tavian straightened, released the desk, and resumed his seat, as though nothing had occurred. His breathing was perfectly controlled. His expression was perfectly composed, but a faint sheen of sweat had appeared along his temple. "We are done for tonight," he said. "Fen will see you to quarters more appropriate than the room you've been waiting in. You will remain in the palace until I decide otherwise." "Am I a prisoner, Your Majesty?" Saren asked. "You are a guest," the king said, and the word carried the distinct weight of something that was not optional. Fen opened the door and gestured for her to follow. Saren rose and crossed the room, but at the threshold she paused and glanced back. Tavian had already returned to his documents, his head bent over a report, his pen moving with careful deliberation. But his other hand, the one resting on the desk, was trembling. Fen led her down 2 flights of stairs and through a corridor she had never seen. The rooms he showed her into were modest but clean. A proper bed with actual blankets, a washstand, a window that looked out over the inner courtyard rather than the servants' alley. "Rest," Fen said from the doorway. "Tomorrow will be a long day." "Why?" Saren asked. The beta hesitated. His dark eyes searched her face with an intensity that reminded her uncomfortably of his king. "Because His Majesty will want to test you," Fen said. "And because something happened in that room just now that I have not seen in a very long time." Before she could ask what he meant, he closed the door and was gone. Saren lowered herself onto the edge of the bed, her mind racing. She replayed the moment in the study, the king's hand on the desk, the amber flash in his eyes, the tremor. He had hidden it beautifully. If she had blinked, she would have missed it entirely. But she had not blinked. The next morning, Fen arrived at her door just after dawn. He brought her breakfast on a tray, which was disorienting enough, and then informed her that the king required her presence in his private study for a series of security consultations. "Security consultations," Saren repeated. "His word, not mine," Fen said mildly. She followed him back through the corridors and into the same austere room from the night before. This time the morning light was thin and pale through the narrow windows, and the fire had been freshly stoked. Tavian was already at his desk, dressed and working, looking as though he had not slept at all. "Sit," he said without looking up, gesturing toward a chair that had been moved from the desk to the wall. Saren sat. 3 advisors entered over the next hour. They spoke of border movements, supply routes, the interrogation of the captured ambushers. Saren sat against the wall and listened and tried to understand why she was here. Then she understood. It happened gradually. Tavian's posture, rigid and controlled when she entered, began to ease. The tension in his shoulders loosened by degrees, so subtle she would not have noticed if she had not been watching him so carefully. His breathing deepened. The sharp, clipped quality of his voice softened into something more measured, and twice in the span of an hour, his eyes flashed amber. Not the pained, involuntary flash from the night before, something different. Something almost like relief, as though a part of him that had been clenched shut was slowly, tentatively uncurling. The advisors did not notice. They were focused on their reports, their maps, their own voices. But Fen noticed. Saren caught the beta, watching the king from his position by the door, and when their eyes met, she saw something in his expression that sent a chill through her. It was hope, guarded, desperate, barely contained hope. After the advisors left, Tavian worked in silence for another 20 minutes. Saren sat motionless, barely breathing, watching the steady movement of his pen. "You may go," the king said finally, still not looking at her. Saren stood. At the door, Fen fell into step beside her. "Same time tomorrow?" the beta said. "What is happening to him?" Saren asked, keeping her voice low. Fen did not answer immediately. They walked the length of the corridor in silence before he spoke. "The king's wolf is dying," Fen said quietly. "It has been fading since the border war. Slowly at first, faster, now." He paused. "He has not been able to shift fully in over 5 months. If it continues, he will lose the wolf entirely, and an alpha who loses his wolf does not survive long. Saren stopped walking. The corridor felt suddenly narrower, the walls pressing inward. But in that room, when I was there, his eyes flashed, she said. His wolf responded. Yes, Fen said, and the word carried the weight of everything he was not saying. That is why you want me there tomorrow. That is why I want you there every day. Saren stared at him, the implications cascading through her mind. The king's wolf was dying. The most powerful alpha in the realm was slowly being hollowed out from the inside, and he was hiding it from everyone. And somehow, for reason she could not begin to understand, her presence in the same room was the only thing that made his wolf surface. She returned to her quarters in a daze, sat down on the narrow bed, and covered her face with her hands. On the third evening, it happened. She was sitting in her usual chair against the wall while Tavian worked late, the fire burning low and the lamps casting long shadows across the maps pinned to the wall behind him. He had been quiet all evening. More tired than usual, she thought. The hollows beneath his eyes looked deeper, and twice he had paused mid-sentence during an earlier meeting, losing his thought for a moment before recovering with a sharp shake of his head. Saren was watching the fire when the vision struck. It was different from anything she had seen before. Not a stranger, not a servant in the corridor, not a child in the village. It was him. She saw Tavian on his knees, in a dark place. A place that smelled of wet stone and something older and worse. His body was convulsing. His form flickered between human and wolf, trapped in a half-shift that twisted his bones at wrong angles. He was trying to scream, but no sound came out. The wolf inside him was being pulled away, dragged out through his ribs, like a living thing torn from its anchor, and he could not hold on. The vision released her with a gasp. Saren's hands were gripping the arms of her chair so hard her knuckles had gone white. Her breath came in shallow, ragged pulls. She looked up at the king, the real king, sitting calmly at his desk, turning a page of his report with steady hands. He did not know. He did not know that whatever was killing his wolf from the inside was not fading quietly. It was building. And if what she had just seen was true, the man who commanded every soul in this kingdom was running out of time. The arrangements settled into a rhythm within days, though settled was perhaps too generous a word for something that left Saren perpetually on edge. Every morning, Fen appeared at her door. Every morning, she followed him to the king's study. Every morning, she sat in the same chair against the wall while Tavian worked, met with advisors, read reports, and gave orders with a quiet authority that made grown men twice her age lower their eyes and nod. She was not part of any of it. No one addressed her. No one explained what she was doing there. She simply existed in the corner of the room like a piece of furniture the king had requested and no one dared question. On the fourth morning, a junior counselor made the mistake of asking, "Forgive me, Your Majesty," the man said, glancing sideways at Saren. "But why is the maid present during a classified briefing?" Tavian did not look up from his document. "She stays," he said, and the two words carried enough finality to close the subject permanently. The counselor did not ask again. No one did, after that. What Saren noticed, what she could not stop noticing, was the effect her presence had on him. It was subtle enough that no one else in the room seemed to register it, but she was watching, always watching, because the vision of his wolf being torn away still burned behind her eyes every time she closed them, and she could not stop tracking his condition, the way a healer tracks a fever. In the mornings when she first entered, his posture was rigid, his jaw was set. The lines carved into his face aged him 10 years beyond what he was. He looked like a man held together by willpower alone, every muscle locked, every breath carefully rationed. Within the first hour, it began to ease. The iron line of his shoulders would drop by half an inch. His breathing would deepen. Once, she watched his hand unclench against the desk, finger by finger, like something inside him was uncurling from a defensive crouch. And the amber, it came more frequently now. Brief flashes in his eyes that lasted no longer than a heartbeat. But each one felt like a small victory. His wolf was responding to her. She still had no idea why. By the second week, the arrangement had expanded beyond the study. Fan asked her, with his usual careful neutrality, if she would be willing to attend the evening council sessions as well. Saren agreed, and found herself sitting in the back of the council chamber 3 nights in a row, watching the king preside over arguments about grain tariffs and border patrol schedules, while something ancient and wounded inside him, slowly, tentatively, reached toward the surface. She did not speak to him, he did not speak to her. The distance between them was maintained with rigid precision, and Seren told herself that was fine. She was here to serve a function. She was furniture. She was medicine that happened to have legs. The days blurred into one another, each one following the same carefully maintained pattern. Morning study, afternoon break, evening council. She learned the rhythms of his work the way a musician learns a piece of music, absorbing the tempo and the pauses and the places where the melody strained. She learned that he rubbed his left temple when a report frustrated him. She learned that his handwriting grew smaller when he was tired, the letters cramping together as though even his pen was running out of energy. She learned that the only time his shoulders fully relaxed was in the 10 minutes after the last advisor left, and before he picked up his next document, a narrow window of stillness that she came to guard, fiercely, staying absolutely silent so nothing would disturb it. She also learned that the amber flashes came most frequently during those quiet moments, as though his wolf felt safest when the room was empty of everyone except her. Fen watched all of it. The beta said very little, but his eyes missed nothing. On the 11th day he stopped Saren in the corridor after the morning session and said, without any preamble, "The episodes are less frequent since you started attending. The wolf is surfacing more often and more steadily. Whatever you are doing, do not stop." Saren wanted to tell him she was not doing anything. She was sitting in a chair. She was breathing. She was existing in the same room as a man who did not acknowledge her presence for hours at a stretch. But that was not entirely true, and she knew it. Because somewhere between the 4th day and the 11th, something had shifted inside her as well. A quiet awareness that lived in the center of her chest, a warmth that kindled every time she entered the study and found him already there, bent over his work, the firelight catching the sharp planes of his face. She did not name it. She refused to name it, but it was there, growing steadily, and she suspected that whatever drew his wolf toward the surface was not just her scent or her presence, but this unnamed thing, pulsing quietly between them. Then, on the 15th evening, the king spoke to her directly, for only the second time. The council session had ended. The advisors had filed out. Fen lingered by the door, waiting to escort her back to her quarters. Saren rose from her chair, gathered the shawl she had taken to wearing in the drafty chamber, and turned toward the exit. "The vision you had," Tavian said. Saren froze. "The night you warned me about my sister. You said, 'You see how people die.'" He was still seated at the head of the long table, his pen resting on the documents in front of him, his dark eyes fixed on her. "Have you seen mine?" The question landed like a stone in still water, and the ripples spread through her chest until she could feel them in her fingertips. She had. She had seen exactly how he died, had watched the wolf ripped from his body in that dark, terrible place, had heard the silence where his screams should have been. The vision had returned 3 more times since that first night, each time more vivid, each time more urgent, and each time she had buried it because she did not know what to do with it. She should tell him. She knew that. He deserved to know, but if she told him the truth, if she described what she had seen, she would have to admit that his wolf was not just fading, it was being taken. Something was actively pulling it away from him, and the process was accelerating, and she had no idea how to stop it. Saren looked at the king sitting alone at the end of a long empty table, asking her if she had seen him die. She looked at the hollows beneath his eyes, and the tension he wore like chainmail, and the faint, almost imperceptible tremble in his writing hand that had grown worse over the past 2 weeks. "No, Your Majesty," she lied. She held his gaze and willed her heartbeat to stay even. After a moment that lasted a century, Tavian nodded once and looked back down at his documents. Saren left the chamber on shaking legs. Fen fell into step beside her, and she could feel his gaze on the side of her face. "You're a terrible liar," the Beta said quietly. Saren said nothing. Her throat was too tight to speak. That night she dreamed of the dark place again, and this time, Tavian turned his head and looked directly at her. His eyes were solid amber, all wolf, and they were full of a grief so vast she woke up with tears on her face and no memory of crying. The first crack in the wall came, as these things often do, by accident. Saren was carrying a cup of tea across the king's study. She had started doing that recently. Small, quiet acts of care that she told herself were simply practical. The man worked for 16 hours straight some days. Someone needed to make sure he consumed something other than ink fumes and stubbornness. She set the cup on his desk, and her sleeve caught the edge of a document pile. 3 weeks of meticulously stacked reports slid sideways in a slow, catastrophic cascade and hit the floor with a sound like a small avalanche. Saren dropped to her knees, instantly scrambling to gather the pages. "I am so sorry, Your Majesty. I will put them back in order. I know they were arranged by date. I was watching you sort them yesterday, and I remember the system. Region first, then date, then priority. And the ones with the red seal go on the left, because those are from the border garrisons. I will fix this. Please do not have me executed." She realized she was rambling. She also realized the king had not said a word. She looked up. Tavian was staring down at her from his chair, with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Something between bewilderment and a thing she could not name. Something warm and startled that softened the hard lines around his eyes. "You remembered my filing system," he said. "I have been sitting in this room for 2 weeks, Your Majesty. I have had very little else to observe." "You remembered the red seals," he said, as though this was the part that confounded him most. "They are hard to miss," Saren replied, still on her knees, clutching a fistful of documents. There was a pause. Then Tavian leaned down, took the papers from her hands, and set them on the desk. His fingers brushed hers in the transfer, and the contact lasted perhaps half a second, but it sent a jolt up her arm that made her inhale sharply. "Leave them," he said, his voice lower than usual. "I will sort them myself. But I made the mess, and I am telling you to leave it." Saren stood, her cheeks burning. She retreated to her chair against the wall and pressed her hands together in her lap to stop the tingling where his fingers had touched hers. After that, the small moments accumulated faster than she could track. He started leaving a lamp burning on the table nearest her chair, even though the firelight was more than sufficient. When she mentioned that the draft from the window behind her was cold in the evenings, the draft disappeared the next day, sealed with new weather stripping that still smelled of fresh pitch. He never acknowledged any of it. Saren returned each small act with her own. She brought the tea without being asked. She learned which documents frustrated him most, and made sure the fire was stoked higher on evenings when the border reports came in, because those were the nights he worked latest, and his jaw clenched the tightest. She started carrying sprigs of dried lavender in her apron pocket, not because she thought it would help his wolf, but because the study smelled of old stone and tension, and she thought it could use something gentler. One evening, Tavian paused mid-sentence during a meeting, lifted his head, and inhaled. "What is that?" he asked. The 2 advisors in the room looked confused. "Lavender, Your Majesty," Saren said from her corner. His gaze found her. Something flickered in his eyes, amber and warm. "Keep bringing it," he said, and turned back to his advisors as though he had not just made a personal request of a maid in front of witnesses. The advisors exchanged a glance. Siren stared at her hands and tried to control the flush climbing her neck. But it was the night of the storm that changed everything. Thunder rolled across Dunhaven like cannon fire, rattling the windows in their frames. The council session had been cancelled. The castle was battened down. Siren should have been in her quarters, but Fen had sent word that the king was working late, and her presence was requested. She found Tavian at his desk, but he was not working. He was sitting with his elbows on the wood and his head in his hands, and he was shaking. Not the controlled tremors she had glimpsed before. Full, violent shudders that racked his frame and made the pen on the desk roll sideways and fall to the floor. "Your Majesty." Siren crossed the room without thinking. "Stay back," Tavian said through gritted teeth. His voice was wrecked. She could hear the wolf in it, a low harmonic beneath the words that vibrated in her chest. She stopped 3 feet from the desk. His head lifted. His eyes were pure amber, blazing and wild, and the look on his face was one of barely contained agony. "It is trying to surface," he managed. "The wolf, it keeps trying to come through and it cannot. Something is holding it back, and the pain." He trailed off, his jaw locking. Siren watched his fingers dig into the wood of the desk, watched the tendons in his forearms stand out like cords. "How long has this been happening?" she asked, already knowing the answer would be worse than she expected. "Every night," Tavian said. "Every night for 6 months. It builds and builds and it cannot break through, and then it retreats and takes more of me with it each time." The admission cost him something. She could see it in the way his shoulders curved inward, the way his breath shuddered. "Let me help," Siren said. "You cannot. I am already helping. Your wolf responds to me. You know it does." He looked at her, and for the first time, there was no mask, no composure, no king. Just a man in pain who is running out of ways to hide it. "If I lose control," he said, "I could hurt you. You will not. You do not know that." Siren took the last 3 steps and placed her hand on his shoulder. The contact was electric. She felt it arc through her palm and up her arm and settle somewhere deep in her chest, and Tavian made a sound that was half groan, half gasp. His eyes flared brighter, the amber deepening to gold. And then slowly, slowly, the shaking began to ease. His breathing steadied, his hands unclenched. The wild, burning glow in his eyes dimmed to a low ember and then faded entirely, leaving behind the familiar iron gray, but warmer now, softer. He looked up at her. She looked down at him. Her hand was still on his shoulder, and she could feel the heat of his skin through the fabric of his shirt, and the moment stretched between them like a held breath. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You are welcome, Your Majesty." "Tavian," he said. Siren blinked. "What?" "My name," he said. "When we are alone, when you have your hand on my shoulder, and you are the only thing keeping the wolf from tearing me apart from the inside, I think you can use my name." Siren's heart did something it had never done before. It ached, not with pain, but with a tenderness so fierce it frightened her. "Tavian," she said softly, testing the word. His eyes closed. And for the first time since she had known him, the hard, carved lines of his face relaxed into something that looked almost like peace. 3 days later, Fen told her the truth she had already half guessed. They were standing in the corridor outside the king's study, speaking in voices low enough that the guards at either end could not hear. Tavian was inside, meeting with his intelligence officers about the ambush investigation. The captured wolves had talked. The conspiracy reached higher than anyone had expected. "It is not natural," Fen said, his dark eyes grave. "What is happening to his wolf? We thought it was battle sickness at first. Something the war had done to him. But Wivara, the court healer, ran every test she knows. There is no physical cause." "Then what is it?" Siren asked, though the vision was already playing behind her eyes. That dark place, those invisible hands, pulling the wolf out through his ribs. "A curse," Fen said, "placed during the siege of Grimoire. The last act of a dying pack alpha named Marin, the leader of the Blackridge Wolves. Saren felt cold settle into her bones. Tell me everything. Fen leaned against the stone wall and crossed his arms. Greymore was a fortress settlement on the southern edge of the kingdom. The Blackridge wolves had been raiding our territories for 2 years, burning villages, killing civilians. Tavian tried diplomacy first. 3 separate peace offers. All rejected. He paused, his jaw tightening. So he went to war. The siege lasted 2 months. It was brutal. When the walls finally fell, Marin was dying. Gut wound. Nothing anyone could have done. But with her last breath, she cursed the king. She was a blood witch. Not powerful, not trained, but dying wolves have a way of pouring everything they have left into their final act. What did the curse do? Saren asked. It is killing his wolf from the inside, Fen said flatly, severing the bond between man and beast. Slowly, painfully, like pulling a tooth that goes all the way to the bone. Saren pressed her back against the wall. Her legs felt unsteady. How long does he have? Fen's silence was answer enough. Fen, how long? Ivara estimates 2 months. Perhaps 3, if we are fortunate. He met her eyes. But his episodes are worsening. You saw the one during the storm. They are coming more frequently and lasting longer. Each time the wolf tries to surface and fails, it damages the bond further. The curse feeds on the attempt. So the harder he fights it, the faster it kills him, Saren whispered. Yes. Saren closed her eyes. She thought of his face during the storm. The agony in it, the raw vulnerability he would never have let anyone else see. She thought of his fingers digging into the desk and the sound he had made when her hand touched his shoulder. That broken, grateful sound that had lodged itself in her chest and refused to leave. There is more, Fen said carefully. Wyvara believes your presence is slowing the curse. Whatever effect you have on his wolf, it is acting as a counterforce. The wolf surfaces when you are near, because something about you gives it the strength to push against the thing that is killing it. But it is not enough, Saren said. No, it is not a cure, it is a delay. But without you, the timeline accelerates drastically. A few weeks at most. Saren opened her eyes and stared at the beta. Does Tavian know all of this? He knows about the curse. He has known since Ivara identified it 3 months ago. He does not know how little time remains. Fen hesitated. And he does not know that your presence is what has been holding the wolf together. Why not? Because if he knew, he would send you away. The words hung between them. Saren stared at Fen, uncomprehending. He would send me away? Why would he send away the one thing slowing the curse? Because the curse is not passive, Fen said. It is not simply fading the wolf away. It feeds on connection, on bonds, on anything that ties his wolf to the living world. And if it senses a new anchor, someone the wolf is reaching toward. He trailed off, and Saren felt her blood turn to ice. It will try to consume me too, she finished. That is what Ivara fears. The corridor felt like it was closing in around her. Saren pressed her palms flat against the cool stone wall and forced herself to breathe. So the very thing that is helping him could also destroy me. Yes. And you have been keeping this from him because he would rather die than risk my life. I have known the king since we were boys, Fen said. He has carried every burden this kingdom has placed on him without complaint, but he will not carry yours. If he learns you are in danger because of him, there will be no argument, no negotiation. He will cut you out of his life, so cleanly, you will wonder if you were ever in it. Saren thought of the lamp he left burning by her chair. The draft he had sealed without telling her, the lavender he had asked her to keep bringing. The way he had offered her his name in the dark, like it was something precious, he was not sure she would want. I am not leaving, she said. I know, Fen replied. But he cannot find out. Not yet. Not until we find a way to break the curse entirely. Saren nodded. Her hands were shaking. She went back into the study. Tavian looked up when she entered, and something in his expression eased. The way it always did. The way she had been trying not to read too much into for weeks now. Everything all right? He asked. Fine, Saren said, and sat in her chair. Fen was telling me about the castle drainage system. Riveting stuff. Tavian's mouth twitched. I doubt that. You are right. It was terrible. I may never recover. He almost smiled. Almost. And Saren watched the amber flicker in his eyes, and felt the warmth of it settle into her chest, and knew with perfect, terrible clarity that she was in far deeper than she had ever intended to be. That night, she sat in her quarters, and stared at the wall, and tried to think clearly. The curse fed on connection. Every moment she spent near him, every time his wolf reached toward her, the curse grew stronger even as his wolf grew temporarily steadier. She was a balm and a poison simultaneously, and neither of them had known it. She should tell him. She should walk into his study and lay every piece of it at his feet and let him make his own decision about the risk. But Fen was right. She knew exactly what Tavian would do. He would send her away. He would do it gently, or he would do it harshly, but either way, the result would be the same. He would choose her safety over his own life, and then the curse would devour him within weeks, and she would be left standing in some distant corridor feeling the exact moment the most extraordinary man she had ever known ceased to exist. She could not allow that. 3 more days passed. 3 days of sitting in his study, bringing him tea, trading the small, careful words that had become the scaffolding of something neither of them had named. 3 days of watching the amber flare and fade in his eyes while knowing, with the certainty that was her curse and her gift, that the thing inside him was growing hungrier. On the 3rd evening, Tavian set down his pen and looked at her. You have been different, he said. These last few days quieter. I am always quiet. No, he said, you are not. You talk. More than anyone I have ever met. You have opinions about my filing system and my tea and the structural integrity of the council chamber's left wall. You once spent 15 minutes explaining why the kitchen cat was being unfairly blamed for the missing butter. The cat was innocent, Saren said. The point is that you have gone quiet, and I do not like it. The words landed somewhere tender. Saren looked at him, at the hollowed planes of his face, at the dark shadows beneath his eyes, at the way he was looking at her with an openness that made her chest ache. Tavian, she said, and his name still felt like a gift every time she used it. There is something I need to tell you. He went still. What is it? She opened her mouth. She saw it unfold in her mind. The revelation, the horror on his face, the decision already forming behind his eyes. She saw him standing, putting distance between them, his expression shuddering closed. She saw herself being escorted from the room, from the castle, from his life. The kitchen cat really was innocent, she said. I found the butter. A scullery boy was hiding it behind the root cellar. I thought you should know. Tavian stared at her for a long moment. Then, for the first time since she had known him, the king laughed. It was not loud, it was not long. But it was real, a low, warm sound that broke from his chest, like something that had been trapped there for years, and it transformed his face so completely that Serene forgot how to breathe. She smiled back, her eyes stinging, and pretended her heart was not shattering inside her chest. It was Vara who forced her hand. The court healer appeared at Saren's door at dawn, her silver-streaked hair pulled back severely, her expression grim enough to curdle milk. She carried a leather satchel and a look that said she had not come for a social visit. I need to examine you, Vara said without preamble. I feel fine, Saren started. You look like a ghost. You have lost weight. You are not sleeping. And, unless I am very much mistaken, you have been having nosebleeds. You have been hiding by washing your pillowcase before the chambermaids collect it. Saren's mouth closed. Ivara stepped inside and shut the door. The examination was thorough and silent. The healer checked her pulse, her eyes, the color of her nail beds, the sensitivity of the glands beneath her jaw. She asked questions in a clipped, clinical tone, and did not react to any of the answers. When she was finished, she sat back and looked at Saren with an expression that was equal parts professional concern and personal fury. How long have you known? Ivara asked. Known what? Do not play games with me, girl. The curse is feeding on you. You are showing early-stage bond deterioration. The same markers I have been tracking in the king. Fatigue, weight loss, sensory sensitivity, bleeding. How long? Saren's hands clenched in her lap. The nosebleed started 5 days ago. Vara's jaw tightened. 5 days, and you told no one. I did not want to alarm anyone. You did not want to be sent away, Vara corrected sharply. She stood, paced to the window, paced back. Fen told you about the risk. I know he did. I told him to tell you. He told me, and you stayed anyway. You foolish, stubborn, reckless child. Ivara's voice cracked on the last word, and Saren realized with a start that the healer was not angry. She was frightened. The curse does not just feed on your connection to him. It feeds on your gift too. Your seer's ability. It is draining you from both directions. If you continue at this rate, you will not last another month. The room went very quiet. Saren stared at Vada and felt the floor tilt beneath her. Does Tavia know? She asked. Not yet. But he will, because I am going to tell him. You cannot. I am his healer. I have a duty. If you tell him, he will send me away. And if he sends me away, his wolf dies within weeks. You said that yourself. And if you stay, you die beside him. Is that the trade you are willing to make? Saren's eyes burned. I did not say I had a plan. I said you cannot tell him. Not yet. Give me time to find another way. Vivara studied her for a long, hard moment. 3 days, the healer said. Finally, I will give you 3 days. After that, I tell him everything, and whatever happens, happens. The healer left. Saren sat on the edge of her bed and pressed her fingertips to her temples, where a headache was building with slow, relentless pressure. 3 days. She went to the study that morning as always, sat in her chair as always. Brought the tea as always, but something had shifted, and she could feel it in the air between them. A fragility that had not been there before. Tavian noticed immediately. You are doing it again, he said. Doing what? Going quiet. He set his pen down. And you are pale. I am always pale. I live in a castle. The sun is a rumor I have heard about, but never confirmed. He did not smile. His eyes moved over her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Are you unwell? I am fine, Tavian. He held her gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then he picked up his pen and returned to his work. But she caught the way his hand hesitated before the first stroke. The way his jaw set slightly tighter. He knew something was wrong. He could feel it. Whether through some nascent awareness of the bond forming between them, or simply through the instinct of a man who had been paying closer attention than he let on, he knew. That afternoon, the nosebleed came while she was still in the study. She felt the warmth first, a trickle starting at her left nostril. She pressed her sleeve to her face, casually angling away from the desk, but the blood came faster than she expected, and a drop landed on her skirt before she could catch it. The scent hit the room like a struck bell. Tavian's head snapped up, his nostrils flared, his eyes flashed amber so bright and so fast that for an instant they looked like molten gold, and he was on his feet before she could react. You are bleeding, he said, and his voice had dropped to something deep and rough and barely controlled. It is nothing, just a nosebleed. He crossed the room in 3 strides. His hand caught her chin, tilting her face up, and the contact sent that familiar jolt through her. But this time, it was accompanied by something else. A pull. Desperate and aching and terrifyingly strong. His thumb brushed the blood from beneath her nose, and his hand was shaking. This is not nothing, he said. Tavian, please. His eyes searched hers, amber fading to gray darkening with something that looked like dawning horror. How long? He asked slowly. Have you been bleeding? She tried to look away. His hand held her face still. Siren, he said. And her name in his mouth had never sounded like that before, like a prayer and a wound at the same time. 5 days, she whispered. The silence that followed, was the worst she had ever endured. She watched the realization move across his face like a shadow. She watched him connect it. The fatigue, the weight loss, the quiet, the blood. She watched the horror settle into his expression and harden into something colder and more terrible than anger. He released her chin and stepped back. 1 step. 2. Putting distance between them with a deliberateness that made her stomach drop. "Fen," he called. The beta appeared in the doorway within seconds, his expression wary. He took one look at Saren's face, at the blood on her sleeve, at the king's expression, and his own face went carefully blank. "She is leaving," Tavian said. "Tavian, no." Saren stood. "She is leaving tonight. Arrange a carriage to the southern estate, comfortable quarters, a stipend, whatever she needs. Please listen to me. I have heard enough." He turned to her, and his face was the stone mask she remembered from the first night, impenetrable and merciless. But his eyes betrayed him. They were burning. "You knew," he said. "You knew the curse was feeding on you, and you said nothing. Because you would have done exactly this." Saren shot back, her voice rising. "You would have sent me away to protect me, and then you would have died alone in this room with your wolf tearing itself apart inside you and no one to hold you through it. Better that than your blood on my conscience." "That is not your decision to make. I am the king," he said, and the words came out raw and ragged. "Everything in this castle is my decision, including whether an innocent woman dies because of a curse that was meant for me." Siren felt the tears spill over and did not bother wiping them away. "And what about what I want? Does that not matter?" Something cracked in his expression. For one terrible moment, she saw everything he was trying to hide. The desperation, the longing, the crushing, furious guilt. "What you want," he said softly, "matters more than you will ever know, which is exactly why you have to leave." He turned away. Saren reached for him, but Fen's hand closed gently around her arm. "Do not make this harder," the beta said quietly. "Fen, please. You know I am right. You know what happens if I go." "I know," Fen said, and his voice held more grief than she had ever heard in it. "But it is his order, and I cannot defy my king." Tavian did not look back as he crossed to the window. His hands braced against the stone sill, his head bowed. The line of his back was rigid, and Saren could see the tremor running through his shoulders, and she knew with absolute certainty that sending her away was costing him everything he had. Fen led her from the room. The door closed behind them with a sound that echoed down the empty corridor like something final. In her quarters, Saren sank onto the bed and wept into her hands. Not for herself. For the man standing alone in his study, with his wolf dying inside him, choosing her life over his own, because he did not believe he deserved saving. The carriage was prepared by midnight. Saren was escorted to the courtyard by 2 guards who would not meet her eyes. She climbed inside. The door closed. The horses began to move. She made it exactly 1 mile down the road before the vision hit her. It was the worst one yet. Tavian on his knees in the dark place, the wolf being wrenched from his body, his mouth open in a silent scream. But this time there was more. The dark place was spreading. Cracks of shadow bleeding outward like roots, reaching through stone, through wood, through flesh, reaching toward Dunhaven, toward everyone inside it. The curse was not just killing the king. It was about to consume the entire castle. Surin slammed her fist against the carriage wall. "Stop," she shouted. Turn around now." The driver refused to turn around. Orders from the king himself, the man said through the narrow opening at the front of the carriage. "Straight to the southern estate. No stops." Saren did not argue. She opened the carriage door while it was still moving, and jumped. The road was frozen hard beneath her, and the impact knocked the breath from her lungs. She rolled, stones biting through the thin fabric of her cloak, and came up on her hands and knees with her palms scraped raw and her vision swimming. Behind her the driver shouted. The carriage slowed. wheels grinding against gravel. Saren was already running. She ran back toward Dunhaven through the dark, her breath tearing from her chest in ragged clouds. The castle loomed above the tree line, a black silhouette against a sky heavy with unshed snow. 1 mile. She had come 1 mile. It felt like 20. As she stumbled over the frozen ground, her legs burning, her lungs screaming, the vision still blazing behind her eyes, the cracks of shadow, the darkness spreading, the curse reaching beyond Tavian, beyond his wolf, sinking its roots into the stone of the castle itself. She had seen the walls blacken. She had seen the flames guttering out in every hearth. She had seen the wolves of Dunhaven clutching their chests as something cold passed through them like a wind made of poison. The vision had not shown her when. It could be tonight, it could be tomorrow. But it was coming, and the only thing standing between the curse and the kingdom was a king who was too busy dying nobly to fight back. The guards at the gate did not know what to do with her. She was supposed to be gone. She was supposed to be in a carriage heading south. Instead, she was standing at the gate with scraped hands and a torn cloak and a look on her face that made both men take a step backward. "I need to see the king," Saren said. "The king gave orders that you were not to be admitted," the taller guard said carefully. "The king is going to die tonight if you do not let me through that gate." The guards exchanged a glance. Saren watched the hesitation move across their faces and made a calculation born of pure desperation. "I am a seer," she said. "I am the woman who saved Princess Leora's life. And I am telling you right now that if I do not reach the king within the next 10 minutes, everyone in this castle is going to wish I had." The gates opened. She ran through the courtyard, through the main hall, up the stairs. Servants pressed themselves against walls as she passed. She did not stop, did not slow, did not care about the spectacle she was making. She reached the corridor outside his study and found Fen standing at the door like he had been waiting for her. The beta's eyes widened when he saw her. "How did you get here?" "I jumped out of the carriage." "You jumped out of a moving carriage?" "It was not moving very fast." Fen opened the door. "The king does not want to see you. The king does not know what I know. The curse is not just killing him. It is spreading. I saw it. The darkness is going to reach the castle. It is going to reach everyone." Fen's face went pale. He held her gaze for 3 heartbeats, searching for the lie. He did not find one. He opened the door. The study was dark. The fire had burned to embers. The lamps were out. Tavian stood at the window with his back to the room, and even in the dim red light, Saren could see the damage the last hour had done. His shoulders were hunched. His hands gripped the stone sill so hard she could see the strain in his forearms. His breathing was shallow and uneven. "I told Fen no visitors," Tavian said without turning. "And I told Fen the curse is about to eat your castle." He found my concern more persuasive. Tavian turned. The sight of her stopped him mid-motion, his expression fracturing between relief and fury. "You were supposed to be gone. I jumped out of the carriage." "You..." "What?" "Jumped." "Of the carriage while it was moving, down the eastern road. In the dark, on frozen ground. I would do it again." He stared at her. She stared back. Her scraped palms stung. Her knees throbbed. She was breathing hard, and her hair was falling out of its pins, and she probably looked like a wild animal that had been dragged through a hedgerow backward. "You are the most reckless woman I have ever met," Tavian said. "And you are the most stubborn man alive, which is impressive, considering you are actively trying not to be alive at all." Something broke in his expression. The fury dissolved, and what was left underneath was so raw and exposed that Saren felt it in her own chest, like a physical wound. "I cannot watch you die because of me," he said, and his voice cracked on the last word. "And I cannot watch you die at all," Saren said. She took a step toward him. "Tavian, the curse is spreading. I saw it. The shadows are reaching beyond you. They will take the castle. They will take your wolves. Sending me away does not save me. It does not save anyone. It just means you face this alone. And you lose. You do not know that. I am a seer. I do know that. I have never been wrong, and I am not wrong now. He closed his eyes. She watched the fight drain out of him, watched his shoulders drop, watched the rigid composure he wore like armor give way to something desperately, painfully human. I am frightened, he said, and the confession came out so quietly, she almost did not hear it. Not of the curse, not of losing the wolf, of losing you. Saren crossed the remaining distance between them. She reached up and placed her hands on either side of his face, tilting it down toward hers. His skin was hot beneath her palms. His breath shuddered against her wrists. You will not lose me, she said. But you have to let me stay. You have to let me fight this with you. The curse feeds on connection, on bonds, on everything that ties my wolf to the living world. And you are the strongest tie it has ever found. If we stay together and it consumes us both, then we go down fighting together, instead of dying separately, in the dark. His hands came up and covered hers. His fingers trembled against her skin. I have never wanted anything, he said, the way I want to let you stay. Then let me. He pressed his forehead to hers. Their breath mingled in the narrow space between them, warm and unsteady. The bond between us, Tavian murmured. I have felt it since the night you walked into my banquet hall and told me my sister was going to die. I felt my wolf lift its head for the first time in months and recognize something it had been searching for. Saren's eyes burned. I felt it too. I told myself it was the seer gift, some residual effect that calmed the wolf. I told myself it was not real. Was that convincing? Saren whispered. Not for a single moment. He kissed her. It was not gentle. It was not tentative. It was the kiss of a man who had been drowning for months, and had finally been given permission to breathe. His hands slid from hers to her waist, pulling her against him, and the contact ignited something in her chest that blazed through every vein. The bond flared to life between them, not the tentative half-formed thing she had been sensing for weeks, but a full roaring current of gold that connected her heartbeat to his and his breath to hers and made the boundaries between them dissolve until she could not tell where she ended and he began. Tavian's wolf surged. She felt it through the bond, a force of raw, exultant power crashing against the cage the curse had built around it. His eyes blazed pure amber, and the sound that came from his chest was not human. It was wild and triumphant, and it shook the walls. The darkness pushed back. She felt that too. Cold tendrils reaching through the bond, probing, searching for weakness, trying to find a way in. The curse recognized what was happening, recognized the threat, and it fought. Saren gasped as the cold hit her. It was like plunging into black water, like breathing ash, like the foggy place from her visions reaching through the bond and wrapping its fingers around her ribs. Tavian caught her. His arms tightened, his forehead pressed to hers, and through the bond, she felt his wolf throw itself against the darkness with a ferocity that made her teeth rattle. Hold on, he growled. She held on. The bond blazed brighter, a line of molten gold burning through the dark, and the cold retreated, slowly, grudgingly, snarling as it went. Tavian's wolf howled in triumph, and Saren felt the sound resonate through her bones, through her blood, through every part of her that had been quietly reaching for this man since the moment she first stood before him. She kissed him again, deeper, fiercer, and he responded with an intensity that matched her own. The bond blazed between them, golden and vast, and every barrier they had built dissolved in the warmth of it. When Tavian pressed his forehead to the curve of her neck and whispered words she would carry for the rest of her life, the bond sealed with a sound like a bell struck in the deepest chamber of the earth. Saren held him just as tightly, claiming him as hers, and felt the connection lock into place so completely that she could not imagine a world where it had not existed. They held each other in the dark, breathing hard. The fire burned to nothing but coals. Tavian's arms were around her, his face buried in her hair, his heartbeat steady against her for the first time in months. Is it gone? He murmured. The curse. Saren closed her eyes and reached inward, feeling along the golden thread of the bond, searching. The darkness was still there, pushed back, weakened, but not destroyed. She could feel it crouched at the edges, patient and hungry, waiting. "No," she said softly. "Not yet." Tavian's arms tightened around her. She felt his jaws set against the top of her head. "Then we finish it," he said. "Together," Saren replied. She fell asleep in his arms, the bond humming warmly between them, and for the first time, when the vision came, she was ready. The dark place was different this time. She had been here before, in fractured glimpses, half seen through the lens of visions that arrived without warning and departed without explanation. But tonight, standing in the fog with Tavian's hand in hers and the bond blazing gold between their chests, Saren saw the full scope of what the curse had built. It was a landscape of grief. The fog stretched in every direction, thick and gray and utterly still. Beneath their feet, the ground was soft, yielding, covered in a fine gray ash that muffled every step. There were no sounds, no wind, no insects, no birds. Nothing but the oppressive, suffocating weight of a silence that had teeth. "You have been coming here every night," Saren said. "Not a question." "Since Greymore," Tavian replied, his voice flat. "Every time I close my eyes, this is where I go. The wolf gets trapped here. It cannot find its way out, and when I wake, it is weaker." Saren tightened her grip on his hand. Through the bond, she could feel his dread, a low, constant thrumming like a plucked string that never stopped vibrating. "Where does it come from?" she asked. "The curse. Is there a center?" "There," Tavian said and pointed. Through the fog, she saw it. A structure, not a building, not a ruin, but something organic, as though the ground itself had heaved upward and twisted into the shape of a cage. Dark roots or veins, thick as a man's arm, rose from the ash and wove together into a towering, misshapen arch that pulsed with a faint, sickly light. And inside the arch, something moved. Saren's stomach clenched. "What is that?" "The heart of the curse," Tavian said. "Marin's dying gift." She poured everything she had into it. Her rage, her grief, her love for the wolves she could not save. "It is all in there, and it has been feeding on me for over a year." They walked toward it. The ash clung to Serene's bare feet, like something alive, and with every step, the fog grew thicker. Figures emerged from the gray, dozens of them. Wolves in human form, standing silent and motionless, with empty eyes and wounds that would never close. The dead of Greymore. Saren recognized the shape of the curse now. It was not just a weapon, it was a memorial. Marin had not simply wanted to punish Tavian. She had wanted to make him carry her dead. Every wolf that had fallen during the siege, every civilian caught in the crossfire, every child who had lost a parent, they were all here, preserved in the fog, their grief and their accusations looping endlessly through the dark. And Tavian had been absorbing it. Night after night, month after month, he had come here and stood among the dead, and let their sorrow pour into him because some part of him believed he deserved it. "You could have told someone," Saren said, her voice thick. "You could have asked for help." "What would I have said?" Tavian replied, "That the king hears ghosts. That the man who ordered the siege cannot sleep, because the dead will not stop looking at him." Yes, exactly that. A figure stepped forward from the gathered dead. A woman, older, her hair streaked with iron gray, her face ravaged by grief and something worse. A wound in her stomach, crusted and dark, that had been killing her slowly for months before the end. Marin. The Blood Witch of Greymore looked nothing like the monster the stories had built her into. She looked tired. She looked like a mother who had lost everything and had poured her last breath into ensuring the man responsible would never know peace. "You came back," Marin said to Tavian. Her voice was soft, almost gentle. "You always come back." "I do not have a choice," Tavian said. "You do," Marin replied. "You choose to carry it. You choose to stand here and let them weigh on you, because you believe their blood is on your hands. Tavian's jaw tightened. Saren felt the guilt surge through the bond, a tidal wave of shame and sorrow, so vast it nearly buckled her knees. He believed it, every word. He had internalized the curse so deeply that it had become indistinguishable from his own conscience. You offered them peace, Saren said, stepping forward. 3 times, Tavian. You tried 3 times to stop the bloodshed. And then I killed them anyway. You fought a war you did not start to protect people who could not protect themselves. You did not choose the violence. Marin's pack chose it when they burned those villages. When they killed those civilians. Tell that to the dead, Tavian said, gesturing at the silent figures surrounding them. Tell that to their children. I am telling it to you, Saren said, and her voice broke. She took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. Because you are the one who needs to hear it, not them. They are gone, Tavian. They have been gone since Greymoor. What is standing here is not them. It is your guilt wearing their faces. His eyes were bright with unshed tears. Through the bond she felt the walls shudder, felt the defenses he had built around his grief begin to fracture. I was supposed to be better, he whispered. A better king, a better man. I was supposed to find a way that did not end in blood, and you tried. You tried everything, but some things cannot be solved without cost, and the measure of a king is not whether the cost exists. It is whether he carries it honestly. She pressed her forehead to his. You have carried it, Tavian. You have carried it until it is killing you. That is not justice. That is destruction. The fog shifted around them. The figures of the dead stirred. I know what it feels like to believe you are not enough, Saren continued, tears streaming down her face. I spent my whole life seeing death and being unable to stop it. Every vision I could not act on, every life I could not save, I carried it like proof that I was worthless, that the gift was wasted on someone like me. She pulled back enough to look into his eyes. But it was not proof of anything except that the world is hard and unfair and full of things we cannot control, and carrying that weight does not make us noble, it just makes us heavy. Tavian's breath shuddered. She felt the crack widen through the bond, felt the grief rushing toward the surface like water behind a breaking wall. Let them go, Saren said. Not because they do not matter. They matter. They will always matter. But you can honor the dead without living in their grave. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. The fog pressed in. The dead watched. Marin's ghost stood motionless, her dark eyes fixed on the king. Then Tavian's hand came up and covered Saren's. His fingers tightened around hers. I am sorry, he said, and the words were not directed at Saren. He was speaking to the fog, to the dead, to the woman who had cursed him with her last breath. I am sorry I could not save you. I am sorry. Peace was not enough. I am sorry for every single one of you. He paused. His voice dropped to a whisper, but I will not die here. The bond flared gold. Saren felt it blaze outward from their joined hands, cutting through the fog like a blade of sunlight. The ash beneath their feet cracked. The twisted arch at the center of the curse groaned, its dark roots shuddering. Marin looked at them. Something shifted in her expression, and for one fleeting instant, Saren saw not the vengeful witch, not the grieving mother, but a woman who was simply tired. Then go, Marin said quietly. Take your wolf and go. The arch shattered. The roots dissolved into ash. The fog rolled back in every direction, revealing a sky that Saren had never seen in this place. Dark, yes, but scattered with stars. The dead turned away, one by one, dissolving into the thinning gray, like breath in cold air. Marin was the last to go. She looked at Tavian one final time, then closed her eyes, and was gone. Tavian fell. Saren caught him, lowering them both to the ground, and he shook in her arms with the force of a grief that had been locked behind stone for over a year. She held him. She did not speak. She did not try to fix it. She just held him and let the sorrow pour out. And through the bond, she felt every tremor, every wave, every fragment of guilt and shame and loss, as it broke free and dissipated into the night. His wolf howled, not in agony, not in desperation, in release. Saren felt it surge through the bond, wild and golden and free, shaking off the chains the curse had wound around it for months. The sound filled the dark place, echoing off the fading edges of the fog. And then the place itself began to dissolve. They woke together. The study was warm. The fire had been re-stoked at some point, casting a deep amber glow across the walls. Tavian's arms were around Saren, his face pressed against her shoulder, and when he lifted his head, his eyes were clear, not iron gray, not flickering amber, gold. Pure, steady, luminous gold. The eyes of a wolf, fully bonded with its host for the first time in over a year. "It is gone," Tavian said, and his voice was rough with tears but bright with a wonder that made Saren's heart overflow. "The hollow, the cage, it is gone." Saren touched his face. He leaned into her palm, and the smile that broke across his features was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. The curse did not vanish without a trace. Tavian still woke in the small hours some nights, his breath sharp, his hand reaching for her in the dark. Old sorrows did not dissolve overnight, and the names of the dead did not erase themselves from his memory, simply because he had chosen to stop living in their grave. But Saren was always there, her warmth beside him, her hand finding his beneath the blankets, her voice, steady and certain, reminding him where he was. He shifted for the first time 3 weeks after the curse broke. Full shift, complete. The wolf that emerged was enormous, silver-black with eyes like molten gold, and it knocked Saren flat on the courtyard cobblestones and pressed its massive head against her chest until she laughed so hard she could not breathe. Fen watched from the colonnade with his arms crossed and a suspiciously bright sheen in his eyes. The court adapted. It had no choice. The king's mate was a foundling maid, with scraped hands and a gift that saw death coming, and she sat beside him at every council meeting, and he deferred to her on matters that surprised everyone, and no one dared challenge it, because the king looked at her like she was the axis around which the entire world turned. Now, months later, Saren woke to pale winter light filtering through the tall windows of the royal chambers. Tavian was still sleeping. His face was peaceful, his breathing was slow and deep and unburdened. One arm was draped over her waist, warm and heavy and certain. She watched him for a moment, warmth blooming behind her ribs. Then she settled back against his chest, closed her eyes, and let the quiet hold them both.